Of the somewhat recent glut of copy and paste 20-something females producing videos on the recycled topics of why feminism is bad and why free speech is good, few are as prominent or as large these days as the now well-known Roaming Millennial. She has a rather large YouTube channel, commands a substantial audience, and earns exceptionally well. I should state at the outset, I don't begrudge her any of this. As a general rule, women are imitative rather than innovative, and were I a young female, I would likely also attempt to cash in on whatever trend or topic might be the flavor of the year, because that too would be my nature. And all animals, whether the human male, human female, wombats, or giraffes, behave in accordance with their nature. There are no surprises here, standard stuff, and there is nothing very special about this phenomenon, nor Roaming Millennial herself. We have seen this time and again. However, there is a degree of the disingenuous that at times can neither be tolerated nor accepted. And in a recent discussion with Stefan Molyneux, many things were said, and more importantly left out of the conversation that perforce demand a response and ought to be addressed. As such, much of what I will say will be old hat to many, and things that have been talked about and discussed at length for years now. However, for the sake of correcting grave omissions on her part in her defense of marriage, I find it necessary to delve once again into what has now largely become patently obvious. Now, no one will contest that a functional two-parent household is the best environment for children to be raised in, and even Roaming Millennial in her research has posted videos on the importance of fathers in typical copy and paste fashion. This is known. But moving beyond the question of children, to speak of the benefits of marriage, and to praise it as an institution in a one-sided fashion, is disingenuous at best, and intentionally deceptive at worst. For example, in the talk with Molyneux, Roaming Millennial stated that marriage is a more financially stable way of living, yet as always, one must invoke the ancient Roman question of cui bono, or to whose benefit. There is little doubt that marriage allows women to achieve greater financial stability than they would otherwise have were they single. But does this also hold true for men? And in speaking of the glorious benefits of marriage, one must simultaneously acknowledge that marriage is a business arrangement involving two partners, and any business arrangement or contract must necessarily have elements that benefit both parties taking part in it equally. And thus the question arises, does it in the case of marriage in the current year? Imagine you ran a company, and another company wished to enter into a contract with you for the sake of mutual profit, or so you were told. In fact, you were told in great, but very abstract detail, of all the benefits that one reaps from signing the contract, but never with reference to you as a specific entity. You are curious and investigate further. To your consternation, you find out that the proposed business partner would be reaping 80% of the profit in your joint venture, and more importantly, the partner can violate the contract whenever the person wants to, and maintain the stipulations contained therein in perpetuity to the person's benefit. You can also be called to account for a breach of contract regardless of your actions, whether you fulfilled your end or not. And if this person so desires, once again, whether you strictly adhere to the letter of the contract or not, your partner can have you prosecuted, on a whim, willy-nilly, whether the evidence supports your side or not. In short, this business contract is a terrible prospect for you and your company, and would be extremely foolish to enter into. And yet, in no dissimilar fashion, that is the modern marriage contract in the West, a piece of paper that almost unilaterally favors one side of the participants, in which a woman, on a whim, can breach the contract without ever having fulfilled it in the first place, only then to call to account the man, despite the man fulfilling the contract to the letter, to take his assets, to, in the most fickle manner possible, if she so desires, dissolve the partnership and still reap the benefits of the now dissolved contract. Would any businessman worth his salt enter into such a rankly stupid contract or deal where the partner, even if seemingly reliable, has every advantage possible in terms of the law, and behind whom the authorities who enforce the contract will almost certainly uniformly stand? No, of course not. And yet, someone like Roaming Millennial would suggest that just such a contract is of great benefit to you, as a man, because, in this twisted logic, she benefits from the contract greatly. We might call this missing the forest for the trees. This is not compensatory, nor is it proportional. Her sin, as it were, is the sin of omission, a deleterious omission. And who can blame her, perhaps? If one is possessed of tunnel vision, then oftentimes only one perspective is available. Roaming Millennial should tell us, what incentive is there for a man to enter into a completely lopsided contract that is only legally binding for him and not for her, where the weight of the government, and in the larger sense society, will be behind her, but not him? Where you can breach and violate the contract whenever you feel like it, and in whatever manner pleases you, but it is he who pays the price for your own transgressions, where you can garner half his wage for the rest of your life if you so choose, and where you will be given presumed custody of your offspring irrespective of your actual qualifications to do so. Now, I'm not claiming that you specifically would do this, merely that you, as with all women, have the legal power and authority to do so, and that the man has none of that. You can do whatever you want to in the marriage, and the man can do everything and nothing, and everything that is truly consequential will fall to him to deal with. Tell us again, please. Cui bono? How does such a warped and uneven agreement benefit a man? No business contract is structured thus, yet modern marriage is. Let us assume that in this aforementioned theoretical business partnership, your potential business partner were the most trustworthy person you had known, yet simultaneously the stipulations in the contract remain the same, meaning he or she could breach the contract whenever he or she is so inclined and incur no penalties for doing so, and reap all of the benefits from the contract while fulfilling none of his or her contractual obligations. Would it in such a case be wise and called for to go ahead and sign the contract, binding yourself to it merely on the record of trust you have placed in this person, when this trustworthy person will always have a Glock pointed at your head? And perhaps more important is the likelihood that a trustworthy person would denounce such a contract in the first place for the fraudulent piece of paper it is, citing and acknowledging how injudiciously it had been crafted and inequitable and unjust it would be were he or she to receive such enormous benefits with no obligations, whilst the partner had all of the obligations with few to none of the benefits. Likewise, in the real world of contractual marriage, no matter how trustworthy a person presents herself to be, she has the power and authority to do whatever she wants in a marriage with the full weight of the state behind her, and a person such as Roaming Millennial, who presents herself as wise and informed, should denounce ideally the falsity of such a lopsided arrangement, as should all women, petitioning for equal division of benefits and obligations. And yet throughout the landscape one can hear no such calls for a reforging of the marriage contract from women, and one is forced then to wonder why. I wonder indeed. Put in the simplest of terms, no trusted friend and partner would accept a partnership in which he wields a gun to hold over the head of his compatriot. Such terms would necessarily be rejected by an upright person. So why are women not rejecting such terms? And of course, this is the case only in the West, right? Even a cursory glance cast at divorce statistics in the West reveals a uniformity of most divorces being initiated by women at a rate of about 70%. This would have to be different elsewhere, would it not? In Asia, perhaps, freed from the influence of feminist institutions, and largely free from the causes often attributed to nefarious influences in the West. Surely a country such as Indonesia, with the largest Muslim population in the world, would be immune to the ravages of divorce. Apparently not. Quote, "The divorce rate in East Java is the highest in the country, with the province accounting for 47% of all national divorces." East Java Deputy Governor Saifullah Yusuf said he predicted the province would reach 100,000 divorce cases by the end of the year, which would represent a sharp rise from the 81,672 divorces for the whole of 2014. Head of Research and Development at the ministry, Muharram Marzuki, said 70% of divorces are proposed by the wife. As well as money and harmony issues, Muharram cited unpreparedness for marriage, lack of responsibility, and third-party involvement as causes for divorce. Hosnia suggested that there were two ways to make a marriage last, quote-unquote, keeping the marriage focused on its religious meaning and being faithful to the marriage promises. That article stems from 2015, and from a 2016 article titled "Why Women in Indonesia Divorced Their Husbands." Between 2012 and 2013, there were 350,000 divorce cases, averaging 40 divorces every hour. 70% of the divorce cases were filed by women. I wish that every time I went to a wedding, I could tell the ugly truth to the bride that the marriage is not a fairy tale. From my 9-year-long marriage, I've learned that the more empowered you are, the more difficult it is to stay in a marriage. Marital institutions in Indonesia dictate conventional roles for a husband and a wife. They define man, the husband, as the head of the household, the breadwinner of the family, while the woman is the housewife. But these traditional roles of husband and wife are no longer relevant to women in the present day. Women now have jobs and earn money for a living too. In fact, these days, many working wives take the traditional role of a husband. When working women can no longer endure the double burden of a conventional marriage anymore, they have little choice but to divorce their husbands. Over the past 5 years, the Ministry of Religious Affairs reported an 80% increase in divorce cases. Between 2012 and 2013, there were 350,000 divorce cases, averaging 40 divorces every hour. 70% of the divorce cases were filed by women. Well, maybe China is shielded from this. After all, there is very little institutionalized feminism there and very few Jews. But, as documented in this article titled, "What's Behind China's Rising Divorce Rates?" and the subtitle, "Modernity Gender Gap Said to Weaken Marital Ties." In a society where material wealth is strongly associated with social worth, China's rural men are the worst affected, as women flock to the cities for not just work, but also romance. According to the Xinhua report, extramarital sex has jumped among female migrant workers, who often land expensive bride prices when they decide to marry. Deng Xiaogang, a professor of sociology at the University of Massachusetts, told RFA of the massive impact of the sex ratio on marital relations. Women have more choices. Second or third marriages, flash marriages, everything is possible. In the past, in a situation where women had no independent economic status, they basically had no way to divorce, since marriage was an important part of their subsistence, Liu said. Now, they have more freedom. Li Hongxiao, a Beijing lawyer, said that the country's laws are also behind the high divorce rate. A 2003 regulation on marriage and divorce simplified the divorce procedure and allowed couples to divorce the same day. The high divorce rate is also due to the independent personality and lack of tolerance and patience, because most husbands and wives born in the 1980s and 1990s were the only child of a family, Li said. A study by a court in Ximing district of Xiamen, Fujian province, showed that the post-1980s was fueling the rising divorce rate, and about 60% of divorce cases were brought by women. Generally, women have a higher level of education, better income, and enhanced family status, making them less reliant on men economically or psychologically, said Qiang Jiu, a judge responsible for family proceedings. Or another one titled, "Calling It Quits, Divorce Rate Jumps 6%. More than 3.84 million couples called their marriages off in China last year, a 5.6% increase from 2014, the Ministry of Civil Affairs said on Monday, the China News Service reported. The national divorce rate has risen sharply since 2002, with the crude divorce rate, that is the annual number of divorces per 1,000 population, increasing from 0.9 to 2.8 last year. And finally, from an article titled "Getting Out," the gap between how women and men view marriage has grown even wider, says Center President Kwok. And the difference isn't only in Korea. In India, the word divorce used to be associated with a Jezebel image, says sociologist Imtiaz Ahmad. But in today's India, women just don't take as much nonsense as they used to, says Madras-based marriage counselor Vijay Nagaswamy. Nisha, not her real name, is an Indian woman who at age 22 left her home in Britain for an arranged marriage in India. It was, she says, a miserable union, which culminated after 18 years in her attempting to kill herself. She finally left her husband in September 2002 with her 2 sons and is now filing for divorce. For years, I chose not to leave, believing that loving a man was enough to change him, she says, and now I've wised up. Indeed, the willingness of many Asian women to view their own needs as secondary to those of their husbands is decreasing. Divorces are on the increase because the younger generation has been brought up differently, says Uthewan Jamsuti, a public prosecutor in Thailand. They are more individualistic, When they get married, if there is a problem, they tend to think more of their own interests instead of family harmony. But the divorce boom is not merely a reflection of generational shifts. After all, in many parts of Asia, it isn't just sobbing 20-somethings, but much older couples who are breaking up. The children have grown up, the husband is retired or retrenched, and the wife weighs up her options, which are increasingly likely to include claiming half of her husband's retirement package to start a new, single life. There may be no overt conflict between the spouses, but that isn't the issue. Fulfillment and the search for meaning are. Senior divorce has taken root with a special tenacity in Japan, where, like China, 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and where a large senior population has plenty of leisure time and the wherewithal to ponder where they will spend their remaining years. In 1975, 6,810 Japanese couples divorced after 20 years or more of marriage. In 2002, the total was 45,536. I think that one has to be happy in one's life, said Atsuko Okano, a Tokyo-based marriage consultant and author of A Perfect Divorce Manual. If it takes a divorce to attain it, then I'm all for it. Do I need to continue and go on? Marriage is just not a stable prospect for any man in any country these days, and a contract that offers only obligations and few to no benefits is a bad contract, period. You don't need feminism, or Jews, or cultural Marxism to amp up the divorce rate and destabilize marriage across the globe. For example, I had documented a huge reproductive bottleneck in the past with the onset of agriculture, where women, simply reacting to environmental incentives, began marrying and reproducing with farmers as opposed to hunter-gatherers, resulting in a massive population bottleneck where, 8,000 years ago, 17 women reproduced for every one man. This was not the result of ideology, but from powerful environmental shifts and the incentives that arise from such shifts. No doubt ideology plays some role in the modern decline of marriage, but it plays a far lesser role than is often assumed than the far more important technological, economic, and environmental changes we see. There is a reason, after all, why feminism first took hold during the era it did in the late 19th century among wealthy upper-class women in the United States and not in 14th century Europe. All you need is modernity and all its attendant consequences and the freedom women attain in that context, and thus only the relinquishment of that freedom in a voluntary fashion on the part of women ceding away all of their so-called rights could even begin to solve the problem or collapse of the entire system, economic, technological, or more. How likely is that to happen? Financial dependency kept women tied to their husbands in the past, and now that is no longer the case. Does Roaming Millennial want to give up her freedom and access to education, voting rights, and participation in public affairs to preserve the sanctity of holy matrimony? Are women in the larger sense going to do this? I don't think so. And without such a cession of alleged rights and the recreation of female economic dependency on men, marriage will continue to decline and divorce will remain stable and likely rise in every industrialized nation on earth. Roaming Millennial doesn't get it. It's a bit like asking a man to fight for his country. If a man feels no pride, no sense of attachment, if he feels no connection to it, and most importantly, he does not feel his country is worthy of his sacrifice, he will not fight, save through the draft and possible threat of punishment, and even then, he might not fight. What men want matters, and why should any man in full possession of the knowledge of the consequences bind himself to something that he does not benefit from and is so unstable and unreliable simply because some grill said so? I doubt any answers from her will be forthcoming, but they needn't be. Eyes wide open and acceptance of reality is all that is necessary. I think a nice way of ending this video is with a musical masterpiece and timeless Chinese classic that even Roaming Millennial might appreciate, and some of you might know. Enjoy, and enjoy the rest of your week as well.
在你的脸庞，看看周围小伙儿个个都挺娘。女人的渴望就是要有车和房，嫁对人是最大的愿望。问你有没有车，问你有没有房，我妈妈她也问你存折有几张。 靠边，别把路来挡。我也有车，我也有房，还有人民币在银行。你没有事，还没有我强，别吃软饭，我不是你的娘。你没有车，你没有房，别想把美女泡上床。装送个你不就开个破宝马，别装大款，你把我来包养。多情的阳光洒落在你的脸庞，看看周围的小伙，个个都挺洋。女人的渴望就是要有车和房，嫁对人是最大的愿望。
问你有没有车，问你有没有房，我妈妈她也问你存折有几张。假如你没有车，假如你也没有房，赶紧靠边，别把路来挡。
我也有车，我也有房，还有人民币在银行。你们要是还没有我强，别吃软饭，我不是你的娘。你没有车，你没有房，别想把美女泡上床。装送个你不就开个破宝马，别装大款，你把我来包养。你没有车，你没有房，你还想结婚当新郎。如果你生活儿都没本小康，凭什么我和你去流浪？你说我歇斯，我承认也无妨，骂我拜金我也不收藏。男人总得有个男人的模样，没车没房，你别想找新娘。啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦啦。
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.